over the last few weeks, you guys have been working through a series. We called it Him, and we've talked about Luke chapter 8. We've talked about this narrative, the story, right, of Jesus as he is working through this crowd, and he's going to Jairus' house, and, you know, the whole story. You guys have been watching this. You've been listening to it, and we've looked at kind of your pace of life as part of the theme that we're looking at this month. What does it look like to move through life at a certain pace? Sometimes too fast. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes we get interrupted. All these things. Today, what I want to do is, because we've looked at it from like Jairus' perspective, you know, asking God to show up, asking God to do the miraculous. We've looked at it from the woman's perspective of, hey, you know, I need healing and reaching out for Jesus. We've talked about these, but today I want to do something a little different. I want to finish this by looking at this narrative, this story, through the eyes of Jesus. How is he moving? What does it look like for him? How can we learn from him? You know, it's interesting. There's been studies done, and they say when a church person hears a story from Scripture, a narrative that happened, you know, generally speaking, they kind of see it, they put themselves in the story at a certain place. They usually kind of associate with one of the characters. And when people hear like a passage from Luke chapter 8, most church people, right, the men kind of put themselves in the place of Jairus, right, because they're wanting to protect their family. The women often put themselves in the place of the woman who you know, reaches out to find healing. And, you know, sometimes maybe you find yourself in the crowd, or maybe you really associate with the disciples. But what they found is, generally speaking, pastors, when they read that story, you know who they identify with? Jesus. Right? They're like, oh, I must be more like Jesus in this story. I don't know what it is, but pastors seem... But today what I want to do is I want all of us to kind of think about this interaction through the lens of Jesus, what he might have been doing, what he might have been thinking as he was entering all of these different, you know, situations. So the term Godspeed, you've heard that, right? Someone says, you know, I wish you Godspeed in your endeavors, or whatever it may be. And I was thinking about that the other day. I was like, how fast does God go? Like, I mean, what is Godspeed? Is it really, really, really fast? Like if I started going Godspeed, I'd blow up or something, you know? Or is it, you know, I mean, let's be honest, God is everywhere, right? He's omnipresent. So if he is everywhere, is he actually moving? Maybe Godspeed is zero. Like, you know, I don't know. These are the things I think about. Welcome to a little glimpse of my brain at, you know, 11:30 at night while I'm laying in bed thinking about things. But I'm wondering, you know, what exactly is... So that term, Godspeed, actually showed up right around the 14th century is when we first see it in some literature. And obviously, you know what it means. It really means, I wish you prosperity in what you're doing. I wish you well in the endeavor that you are going on, right? May your journeys be safe and you get to where you want to go. But, you know, I wonder if there's more to it than just that. Like, Jesus, we know this from Scripture, right? He says, I have come, right? I've come because if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. So when Jesus came, he literally came to give us a picture of what God was like. So if you have seen Jesus, you have seen the Father. So Jesus came to demonstrate for us exactly what God was like. So... you guys did a series, I don't know, 3-4 years ago called 3, right? And if you remember, the reason it was called 3, not because you all can shoot 3-pointers, okay, but because the average walking pace of a human is 3 miles per hour. Well, when Jesus was walking this earth, he was literally walking the earth, right? He didn't like hover and fly or anything like that. I mean, I guess occasionally he walked on water, which was amazing, but he was still walking. Which means that Jesus, if he was representing God to us, was moving at 3 miles per hour. Therefore, God's speed is 3 miles per hour. And so if I'm thinking about this, I'm like, if God's speed is 3 miles per hour, I can walk 3 miles per hour. Maybe I need to learn a little bit about how Jesus moved through this narrative to understand what it's like to walk at a pace that we might call Godspeed, the speed at which God engaged the world around us. When we look at the text, we can see a little bit about how Jesus models God's speed for us. Let's just start in Luke chapter 8. I'm going to start in verse 40. It says, on the other side of the lake, the crowds welcomed Jesus. Now, before we go on, let's get just a quick context reminder of what's going on here, right? Jesus had been on one side of the lake, the Israel side, right? More on that side. He had crossed it, and now he's coming back. All right, so he's back and forth. On the other side of the lake, that's where he met the guy with the demon, and he was in the graveyard and all that stuff. We read about that in Mark, and it's kind of creepy and weird and odd, right? It's one of those stories you're like, why does Jesus meet some dude who's running naked through a graveyard full of demons doing, it's weird, but he does. Jesus heals him, and the whole town comes out. You remember, they all come out, and they tell Jesus, you need to leave. This is weird, you're too much, we don't want you here. We want you to leave. And so Jesus he's getting back in the boat so that he can head back over to the other side. And just quick context too, it's kind of interesting. The guy who was healed wants to get in the boat with Jesus and go with him. Do you remember what Jesus tells him? He says, no. This guy literally wanted to be with Jesus, and Jesus tells him, no, go share with your family and your friends and everyone from the town. This is what God has done in my life. Go do that. And the guy's like, okay. Now, skip ahead a few chapters, kind of interesting. Jesus ends up back on that side of the lake again, and it says that crowds came out to meet him, this time not to send him away, but because they wanted to meet him because they had heard who he really was. Now, who would have told them that but the man that Jesus had healed and said, go tell your story? Okay, that has nothing to do with the text today, but I felt like you just need to see the context of what's going on, okay? That's just amazing how all these things work together. So Jesus is coming back across the lake, and he shows up, and we don't really know. It just says, though, and here it says that the crowds welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for him. Then a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. I think the first thing we can learn from the pace at which Jesus moved, right, the modeling he did for us of what Godspeed actually looks like, is Jesus was moving with an open agenda. I mean, think about it. It just says Jesus came back across and the crowds welcomed him. Do you hear a next step in there? A plan that Jesus had? Like, was he going to do this, and then he had 13 things lined up to get done over the next weekend or the next 2 days or whatever it was? No, it just says he showed up. The crowds were there. He was just showing up ready to do whatever it is that was going to happen next. Whatever the Spirit was moving, that's where he was going to be. That would drive me crazy. Okay? I'm just going to be honest right up front. That idea of just showing up and saying, okay, God, what's going to happen now? I mean, we know that in the next chapter, Jesus, he asked the disciples, right? He says, who do people say that I am? And they say, and then who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, Son of the living God. And Jesus says, God has revealed that to you. Upon this rock, I'm going to build my church, yada, 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 right? And then from that point, then he goes up to the transfiguration. It's really cool, lots of stuff. And when he comes down, it says that he set his face to get to Jerusalem. That's when he starts having a direction. Because that's when he knows, I got to go to Jerusalem because that's where I'm going to accomplish, right? Conquering death. Up until then, he'd been wandering around. Like, it felt like it was almost purposeless. He just was open and was just moving wherever he went. And that's where he was. I don't know about you. I need a plan. My motto is plan the work, work the plan. Right? I want to know what's going to happen. I can tell you, I frustrate your pastor a lot because I want a plan. Rob's not so, he has a plan, a general idea, but he's often kind of let's just roll with it, see what happens. And it drives me nuts. Like, literally, as soon as we're done here, I'm supposed to go over and hang out with Rob for a little bit. We're recording another episode of the podcast, right, that we do. And I said, I texted him a little bit ago. I said, Rob, I hope, you have some idea as to what this episode will be, because I haven't had a chance to plan anything out. And he goes, yeah, I got an idea. That's it. Didn't feel like sharing any of it with me. He's testing me. I need a plan, and yet Jesus, when he's moving at Godspeed, he is moving with an agenda that is open to whatever God may lay in front of him next. In our world today, let's be honest, we really value efficiency. We value proficiency, right? We value making sure we don't waste any time, because we all only get 24 hours in a day. And so we want to make the most of that. We don't want to waste it. And I think our modern sensibilities, they've really pushed us to plan every single moment of our day. But the way Jesus operated kind of flies in the face of this. Jesus meandered, he wandered. Jesus dilly-dallied. He lollygagged, okay? And he was God. So apparently dilly-dallying and lollygagging is godly behavior at times. I don't know. So I've got two little grandsons, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. Taking them on a walk is maddening to me. Because I'm like, okay, we just need to go right down the street. The park's there. We're going to go play in the park. Well, but there's an ant that I want to look at. Oh, look, there's a flower. Oh, a rock I can jump on and jump off of. I'm like, but there's a park. Let's get to the park. Sooner we get to the park, you can play, and then I can get back home, right? Come on. But it's just, they are just all over and with 2 of them, and they are feral. Like, they are just all over the place. And so, it is just craziness. And Mr., anal retentive here, it drives crazy. But man, they are in every single moment, right? They are embracing every single moment. They love finding whatever is right there in front of them. They don't really care about what's coming later. I think the disciples might have felt like at times they were taking a walk with a 4-year-old. Think about it for a minute. Jesus is walking with them. They're walking around, and he goes, consider the flowers. And they're like, yeah, there's flowers. And he's like, it's kind of neat. Solomon in all his glory did not match the beauty of the lilies of the field. And God just does that out of his graciousness and love. They're like, yeah, but I thought we were walking over there. Now consider the flowers. Consider the birds. They don't worry about stuff, but God feeds them. And then they're walking along, and he sees a farmer. He goes, there was a farmer who was sowing some seed. And they're like, I thought we were walking over to... No, just think about that. And he just goes on. They had to at times be like, focus, Jesus. Could we get somewhere? But he doesn't. He's moving with an open agenda. Now, it wasn't a meaningless agenda or a purposeless agenda. It was just open. There were some things that I think guided him, or some principles that moved him. The first thing that I noticed about Jesus, he was always moving toward someone in need. Right? He was always moving toward those who had a need in their life. And so I wonder if maybe because he was open to whatever was happening, he was able to see where those needs were, to sense them, so that he knew when he saw that's a need that I'm going to meet. Sometimes this is called a cruciform way of living. It's a way of living out the cross. Right? What was the cross? It was an act of selfless love. And so to live a cruciform life, a life that is shaped by the cross, is to live a life that is shaped by selfless love. It means moving toward people who are in need. Can you imagine? Last weekend, I know you guys helped with the mountain bike thing, and that's amazing. I just, please, let me tell you, it's amazing. That was truly just being there to help and to serve. What would it look like? How would Loudonville look if all of New Hope, everyone who calls New Hope home, decided for 1 week to specifically move toward those in need? Not because you want to get something out of it, not because you want it, but just because you want to move as Jesus did with an open agenda toward those in need. How would this town be different if everyone did that? Because see, the second principle that I noticed Jesus does here, because he doesn't just move towards someone in need, he also moves away from power and control over other people. I remember, Jesus was God, right? I mean, he literally had control if he wanted. But that's not how he moved. It's an easy trap for us to move into a situation, especially if we move toward those in need, and to begin to use my ability to help to become a way to control, to become a way to manipulate. So on Monday nights, generally, I go to the Dream Center, the Delaware Dream Center, and we deliver groceries. And I have a route. I have 7 people on the list that I deliver these groceries to. And these are people who really need the groceries. That's why we do it, right? I'm not all that fancy, and I'm not all that good at doing it, but I just show up and do it. And it's very easy for me, if I'm not careful and I don't check myself before I get there, say, look at me, meeting needs, just like I should. Aren't I good, God? It's easy for me. And it's easy for me to walk up to these doors and knock on the door and think about, wow, I'm pretty awesome for doing this. I mean, look at how terrible their house is, or how pathetic. That is that's just sinful. I'm doing good, but I'm doing it in the wrong way. I have to check myself. I know I slip into that easily. I know I do. And so I wonder what would it look like if everyone who called New Hope home decided, you know what, I'm going to move toward those in need, and I'm going to do it in a way that maybe they don't even know it's me that's doing it. That needs are met simply because they were a need. Because I was moving at God's speed, which meant I was moving with an open agenda. And all of a sudden, a need arises, and I can actually move toward that. That could change so much. Now, while his agenda might have been open, and his purposes and the principles that seemed to guide him were in place, notice what happens next, though. Luke 8:45. Jesus is moving through this crowd at God's speed. Who touched me? Jesus asked. Everyone denied it. And Peter said, Master, this whole crowd is pressing up against you. Jesus is moving at God's speed, which means he is moving slow enough to stop. I don't know about you, but sometimes I get going pretty fast just in life. And it can be really hard to stop. It can be really hard to slow down, much less stop. Because I look around and I see everything going on, and I'm like, I got to keep up, I got to do this, and I'm focused, and I'm moving, and I can't stop. And yet Jesus is moving, even with a crowd of people around him, at such a pace that he can sense that something happened, and he stops. I feel like if there was a cartoon of this, it would be like one of those where Jesus is walking and he stops, and then everybody kind of behind him, because they're all just, ah! But he's moving slow enough to stop. If I was Jesus and a guy like Jairus came to me and said, hey, I need you to come, because Jairus was an important dude, right? I mean, he runs a synagogue. He's influential. He's powerful. He could get Jesus' brand out there better, right? He was an influencer. Jairus came to me and said, hey, would you help? And I'd be like, yeah, let's go, let's do this. And I'd Google Maps it, I'd Waze it, right? Because I want to avoid the crowds, I want to avoid any stoppages, I want to get there as quick as I can because I need this to happen so that he can get the word out. And yet Jesus doesn't do that at all. He moves at the pace of the crowd toward Jairus and towards his house. Now, maybe it's just another example of how I am not like Jesus. But I see Jesus moving through this crowd, and he's able to stop when something happens. It's interesting. So if you go to the book of Mark, chapter 5, you read about the same incident. And I'm going to get nerdy on you for just a second, but I think you'll understand why. In the book of Mark, in chapter 5, this part that describes the woman, in Greek, it is a massive run-on sentence, okay? Let me read it to you in English. I'm not going to read it to you in Greek because that would be kind of stupid. It says, Mark chapter 5, starting in verse 25, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him into the crowd and touched his garment. So the actual sentence, sentence is I know it's summer, out of school, whatever, but a sentence is a subject and a verb, a predicate. The subject and the verb of that long sentence is, a woman touched his garment. Everything else in there is what's called participle, right? The ing words, right? Because they're all like, this woman, okay? Everything else is basically telling you the plight of the woman, and it kind of builds like this excitement. If you think about the narrative, a really good writer, right, you can be reading and it just you kind of get a little, your heart picks up a little bit, right, and you start getting excited, and that's kind of the way Mark writes it here. It says, this woman having a discharge of blood, having suffered under many doctors, having spent all that she had, but still not getting any better, and actually getting worse, having heard about Jesus, touched the hem of his garment, and everything stops. It's like time stands still. Even though Jesus was walking with Jairus, he was aware that a desperate woman reached out. For just a moment, moving at God's speed meant standing still. Standing still to meet a need. When you move slow enough to stop, you can be fully present in each moment. I know I find myself at a pace that I can't always be present in every moment. I'll pick and choose. I'll be strategic, but I can't be there for everything. But Jesus was able to stop. Okay, another quick nerdy side thought here. Why did the woman touch the hem of his garment? Right? I mean, she said, I just touched the hem. It's the tassel. Why do we have tassels hanging around? It's not for graduation. Sorry, grads. It's all about the tassel of Jesus. And he says she reached out. Now, we understand celebrity culture today, right? I mean, that's kind of a common theme. I mean, if you go to any concert, if you go to whatever, always there's someone, everybody's there, they want to touch something, right? They want to touch their shoe, want to touch their hand, they want to whatever. Because apparently, if I do that, some of that will rub off onto me. I mean, I remember this was 20 years ago. I had this privilege of going to the Masters, right, the golf tournament. And it was just a practice round. It was a Tuesday, okay? So it wasn't all that fancy. But still, I'm there, and I'm off the 10th green. I walk from the 10th green to the 11th tee. Okay, it's, 50 yards. But because the crowds were not, huge, I literally walked shoulder to shoulder with Tiger Woods all that way. I'm not any better of a golfer than I was before. I was hoping he would heal my slice. I touched the hem of his garment, and I got some. Anyway, it didn't work. You know, in the Greco-Roman world of the first century, this was normal too, right? The celebrity culture was there. Whenever a conquering Caesar, right, would come back into town, people would reach out and want to touch because they felt if he was the conquering general, he must have the presence of the gods with him. And to touch him would be to get some of that power, to feel some of that, to feel special. But Jesus, when he stopped and he looked at the woman, you notice he didn't say, the power of my garment healed you. What does he say? He says, your faith healed you. What does that got to do with anything? What do you mean your faith? It was your garment. What? No. So what was her faith in by reaching out to touch the hem of his garment? Numbers chapter 15, God commands the people to wear tassels. It's called a kanap. It's the corner of their garment. They're supposed to wear these tassels on the kanap, the corner of their garment, and it's to remind them that they are God's chosen people and that God is with them. Once even that a king was established, right, that they would see those tassels as a reminder that God had anointed him and that they would acknowledge him as the king. And later, it started to evolve into the way the prophets would refer to the coming Messiah. Right? They talked about him coming. In Malachi chapter 4, verse 2, it says, "But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness," which is an allusion to the Messiah, the Son, and even though it's S-U-N, it's still referring to God coming as the Messiah. "The Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings." The word there is kanaf, corners of his garment. "And you will go free, leaping with joy like calves let out to pasture." The Son of Righteousness, the Messiah, will come and he will have healing in the corners of his garments. When the woman reached out and touch just the corner of his garment, she was saying, I believe that you are the Messiah. You are the one. You are the Son of God. You are the one who will change me. And by doing that, her faith was demonstrated by reaching out to touch the corner of his garment. And that's why Jesus said when she did that, your faith has healed you. Because you believe that I am who God says that I am. And I wonder in our lives how many times we need to reach out and actually do something that shows that we believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus is the one who came to save us. Jesus is the one who is going to be there for us and has healing in his wings, in the corners of his garment, so that we can leap like calves. Do we truly believe Jesus is who he says he is? Because that woman did. And it stopped Jesus in his tracks. Okay, unpause. Back to the story. If you pulled out your calendar right now, would you say you have the ability to stop if something happened? Or is your day so packed that an interruption would be more like blowing a tire at 70 miles an hour? I know I find myself moving quickly because I want to justify my existence by looking productive, by looking like I'm busy because I might be important. But that's not how Jesus operated. And if I'm going to learn anything from this about the pace that God has called me to, it's to move slow enough that I have an open agenda and that I can stop. That leads to the third thing. In Luke chapter 8, we'll finish the story here, 49 and 50, it says, while he was still speaking to her, the lady, a messenger arrived from the house of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. He told him, your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling, bothering, interrupting the teacher now. But when Jesus heard what had happened, he said to Jairus, don't be afraid. Just have faith, and she will be healed. Moving at God's speed means moving to the melody of God's love. Jesus could very easily have just said, oh, that's rough, Jairus. I'm sorry. Now I got to go do stuff. Savior stuff. Messiah stuff. But he didn't. He says, no. I told you I would heal her. I told you I would be there for you. I told you that I would finish this. Her dying, no, that doesn't stop me. Let's go. Let's finish this. Because God's love was flowing through Jesus. And Jesus was in tune with this melody of God's love. He could hear that message, right? That music that's just always playing that you can't always hear, but it's called creation, right? God has spoken into creation life, and that life is this melody of love that we hear every so often. It might be in a baby's cry, right? It might be during worship when we just have this sense of God with us. It might be when we see that need, and for some reason, we are able to step in and meet that need, and we just hear God's melody of love flowing through us and in us, and we're just in tune with that. But it assumes that we're moving slow enough to actually hear it, to actually move with it. I'm not much of a dancer. I know that shocks you. But, as I think about music, and I think about God's melody, and moving at a pace where I can move with it. Rhythmic, choreographed movement to music is basically dancing, right? In a very technical sense. And I know I've reached many times in my life where I knew the dance, right? I knew the chicken dance and the whatever, right? I knew the moves, but I was moving at such a pace I couldn't hear the music. I actually met with a spiritual director last week, and we were talking, and he was asking me, he asked a lot of hard questions we won't get into, but he asked me about my walk with Christ, and I realized the best metaphor that I could come up with was that right now, at that moment, I said, I feel like I'm dancing, but I can't hear the music. I know the moves, and I'm doing the moves, but I don't necessarily hear the music, so I'm just doing the routine, but I'm not moving with the music. You ever felt that way? Where you know the moves. I mean, you've gone to church, I'm supposed to read my Bible, I'm supposed to pray, I'm supposed to show up at church, I'm supposed to serve, right? I know the things I'm supposed to do, and I can keep doing the moves. But if we're moving at God's speed, then we've got to slow down enough, not just to do the moves, but to hear the music. Because the music then begins to give power to the moves. Because now if the music changes ever so slightly, we can adjust with it, right? We can go with that flow. Don't worry, I'm not going to start dancing. I know some of you are starting to worry, okay? But we can start to feel that music. And we can say, yes, Lord, I sense what you're doing, and I'm ready to adjust. I'm ready to move this way instead of that way. My agenda is open to you. And I'm going to take what I feel of your love moving through me, and I'm going to apply it into this situation. And I realized that part of the reason I couldn't hear it is because I was moving at super Jason speed. And that's what it looked like right there. I was moving because I didn't want to slow down. I don't want to move at God's speed. I want to move at super Jason speed because guess what? Super Jason gets all the credit, right? He's the one that everybody goes, oh, that's so cool. Yeah. I think I'd rather hear the melody than to get all the credit. Because ultimately, that's when I start making a difference in this world. Because I slow down enough to say, God, what are you doing? And that's really my question for you today. Can you hear the music? Can you hear what God is doing in your life? Are you moving at a pace slow enough and open enough that even in a crowd, you can sense what God is calling you to do? Or is your pace so crazy you can't hear his love for his creation? Is it so crazy that all you can hear is this ticking clock driving you forward to each moment saying, you got to get this done, you got to get this done. It's all about you finishing, and you just don't hear the music. Maybe you feel like you're running out of time. And you're trying to hurry to get stuff done, and God's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You don't have to prove yourself to me. You don't have to justify your existence by your efficiency and your proficiency. Your calling from Jesus is to come follow him, which means moving at God's speed, at Jesus' pace. As we wrap up this study of Luke chapter 8, I want to challenge you to walk with Jesus at God's speed. Slow enough to stop, open to whatever God may do, and in step with God's melody of love. Stay in tune and keep on dancing. Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, thank you that you watch over us, you care for us, you lead us even when we don't want to be led. Even when we are, even when we're doing stuff that we shouldn't be doing, but you are with us and guiding us. And so, Father, this morning, as we wrap this study up of this, little teaching of Luke chapter 8, and we've talked about all these things, God, I pray that this morning you would open us up to you and to your pace. And for those, God, that are maybe they're struggling because life is just moving so fast and they need a break. God, this morning, I pray that you would give them a peace as they pray something like, God, I'm here, I'm moving too fast, and I just want to stop and hear from you. God, I pray for this church, New Hope, that they would begin anew to move forward, hearing your love, that beautiful music of your love for the people that live right in this area. Because, God, I know that you care about them and them becoming one of your children way more than even the people here do. So I pray we would get in tune with that. Thank you for loving us. Thank you that ultimately we can rest in you. In Jesus' name, amen.